arms of his kin. At last the cage opens, and fair folk go a-hunting in man's world again.
All right, welcome to this very informal commentary on Unlucky Charms, a film I did back in 2022, I believe, that follows a horror Lucky Charms-esque mascot as it comes into the real world and terrorizes a poor cashier at a convenience store in the middle of the night. So this commentary is going to be very, very loose. I'm just going to take you through the film, sort of comment on the different scenes, some fun facts, some behind-the-scenes things, and then I'll take you through a look at the various project files I have, some of the ways I organize things, and maybe give you a few tips and tricks along the way. This will not be in any way a tutorial on how I made this or an in-depth look at anything, but I always find it fun to sort of go back through old project files and just remember the whole process of making it. So let's get to it. All right, so right from this opening scene, the first bit is the film was made in essentially two. There are two versions of the film: the version that I made, and then the version that was created after its first screening to basically friends and family. And from that, a few pretty not major changes happened, but some larger structural changes happened to various bits. Some scenes were added, some more horror elements were incorporated into the final act of the film. And so the very first thing is that we actually added this first establishing shot to the whole thing, which wasn't in there before. Before it just started right here where we actually just pan up to our cashier. And the idea of this is it felt like we were just getting into the whole film way too quick. It felt like by the time we sort of got our bearings, we were already like 3 or 4 shots into it, and it just became sort of more disorienting. And it really does help to get sort of this exterior shot of the whole thing. The reason I didn't do it before is because I didn't want to have to create a whole setup, a whole like exterior set just for this one shot. But ultimately, I think it really just helped to like sort of bring us into the environment a bit more. And it also, it only took me a day to sort of cobble this together through a bunch of different assets that I had lying around. And since the whole store interior was made, all I had to do is sort of put that there, put a window in front of it, and get a bike and some old like garbage bags or two, and that sort of sets the scene very well for this dark horror picture. All right, so looking at this, you can see we have our first introduction of the actual Magic Munchos brand. Obviously, this is very much a Lucky Charms ripoff, but we don't want to just do a direct copy of that. So we are legally in a different, in a sort of gray area where we definitely have different mascots, different names, but the cover art we made is very similar. Some other fun facts is that this price of the cereal used to be $12.99 because I have no idea why I priced the cereal so high. That is quite an insane amount for a cereal, but that was another thing that changed in the second version of the film. It was bumped back down to $6.99, which is a bit more reasonable for this box of cereal. Another thing that changes, there used to be a whole lot more stuff on this TV. There's a whole post-it note with like things to do, a list of stuff. That was also taken out because it was very distracting and really didn't add too much to it. And I think a lot of people have pointed out before is that you can see throughout here that there's a lot of things are in different languages. Most notably, the cigarettes that are behind the counter are very much are not English. And this is because the whole store itself is cobbled together through a bunch of different 3D assets that I got from online, through various pictures, references, pre-made models, things like that. So they're all a mishmash of different things from different areas. And in hindsight, I would have probably gone for one that was not so clearly visible in every single shot of the film, because it does make it a little bit confusing, but it's not a huge deal, and most people don't even notice. So if you're actually if you're paying attention to this, you'll see there's a few times when the TV actually glitches throughout the short, and this is the most notable one when the actual prizes are introduced. So the sort of lore of it is that the commercial itself is normal. This is actually happening, but once it actually glitches, this is sort of the interference of the Leprechaun ghost sort of altering it so that the man himself thinks that he has to be collecting these like toys, and that there'll be some big prize. So the idea of the skip in the commercial followed by this sort of distorted narrator voice was the idea that this isn't actually something that everyone else has seen. It's sort of an illusion created by the Leprechaun himself.
And with a big prize.
Above the magic munchos every day, your magic muncho troubles.
And you'll notice we have, even though we didn't use Lucky Charms as a brand, we have used every other single cereal brand that can possibly be found, simply because I was too lazy to replace these boxes with fake logos, so everything else around the store is an actual product. I will say getting this shot to work using motion capture animation, which is what I used to animate this, was such a pain because we are seeing such a close-up on his hand that any animation, any like jitters that you get from using a motion capture suit are very much amplified when you see it right in close-up. So there are many versions of this shot that I went through to try and minimize all the jumps that you see. Here's another big bit that was added in the second version of the film. The eyes never actually looked at each other until the second version, and so this isn't even done in 3D. This is just a compositing trick in After Effects where I've created a still frame of the eyeballs and then I animate them just to move over to the sides, so it looks like they're each looking at each other and that they're sort of, it gives them a bit more personality than if they had stayed still like they did before. You don't really get the idea that they're sort of the Leprechauns like little minions or whatever. So this helps make it more clear and makes the sort of reveal a bit more fun. So we're hinting at like something is up and it's because of these tiny little things. And once again, reinforcing the idea that the commercial itself is sort of how the Leprechaun's been communicating into the real world from wherever he's been trapped before is sort of the lore of that. And of course, you can see the little eyes of the Leprechaun as well, in between the flashes. And for those 3D people more aware of 3D things, this whole shot is actually done in compositing. So the actual render of it was all the lights are just on as the camera pulls back. But we rendered out each of the lights as their own separate pass out of the 3D program. So in After Effects, I can just mess with the opacity of each layer and sort of get the flickering exactly the way I wanted without having to go into each of the lights in Cinema 4D and like sort of mess with their intensities. So it just makes it a lot easier to visualize it by doing it after the fact. I was really proud of how well the character model held up in a close-up like this. And this was really a moment that I thought turned out quite well. The idea that the Leprechaun just sort of appears, and he is much taller than you actually expect. You can see his hat is actually just barely touching the ceiling, and I do believe I did have to either shrink the Leprechaun down or raise up the ceiling for this shot to get him to actually fit in there, because it was meant to be basically as tall as could possibly be. And then, of course, the two little like dots of light from his eyes was, for some reason, something that continues to I find it to be like the scariest looking thing. And I actively have to try not to put it in like other monster designs that I do, because I just find it to be like, when you add just like tiny little dots as eyes, I find it to be very terrifying, especially when you're met with this very thin, very gangly silhouette that this character has. And a lot of these handheld shots, because we do have a few of them in here, are actually done using a iPhone app called Camtrack AR, I believe it is. And that basically just allows me to take my iPhone and sort of move it around in space, and the app will track where the phone is moving, and I can import that camera into my 3D program and get this like very natural camera movement. So it really gave the whole thing the look that it has, which is sort of a definitely trying to veer it closer to how I might do like a live action film, and make it feel a bit more gritty, a bit more handheld, and not so smooth and choreographed like you might see in like some other 3D animations. Once again, another shot that was very tricky to do. purely because, again, with motion capture, the biggest issue is where the feet are. If you've ever used a motion capture suit before, you'll know that a character walking forward, the feet can tend to slide around a little bit unless you do a lot of work on top of that to sort of lock them down as they move step to step. And you can see that's definitely what's happening here. You can actually see, especially once his foot's about to be placed down, it starts to stretch. It stretches and it compresses, and that's purely the me manually going in and saying when the foot hits the floor, it's going to lock here and it's not going to move. So that causes the stretching up and the squishing down as it wants to move. And so you can see every single foot basically does that. And that's something I was fine with, because it kind of gave the character a little bit more of a cartoony look when you have the sort of stretching and squashing foots, which I think that's totally fine for this. You also notice back here, there is a one single made up cereal brand other than Magic Munches that we used here. That is Jibble Jabbies, which is an old cereal brand that we made for a school project many, many years ago. And I think we were redoing this shot, so I just added it into the second version of the film. And it's just a little Easter egg that no one else will get. People have also pointed out that the open 24-hour sign is indeed reversed now. So people from the outside will just be seeing a backwards open 24 hours, which I did purposely do. Purely because I felt like it was going to feel visually confusing to have this reverse sign that we've only seen in the opening shot before, so I purposely reversed it back for this shot. But a lot of people pointed it out since then, and I think I'd still keep it the way it is. And this whole sequence is the main bit that was changed in the second version. So shots like this were added in the second one, along with the shot of the toy rolling across the floor. Originally, it was just it was a little bit shorter. Those two shots were gone, and so it felt like the moment was too quick, and we didn't get quite as much of a build up to it. And especially, it was not clear that he threw the toy away in the original version. So adding this shot into it gave that added context and allowed us to sort of build up that music, the horror sound effects, and then end it once the toy sort of rolls into its position on the other end, at the other end of the floor, and made the whole scene sort of play out more the way we expected it to. And it's clear, like, what's distracting him, what he's looking at, and where the leprechaun's going after this. And of course, you have to have the very prominent neck turn sound effect of just of leather and some bones creaking. It was something I really wanted to do. Those shots, it's one that was originally supposed to be a lot shorter. The idea of it, and this was changed even before the first screening of the film, I realized after I animated the shot that it had to be different. So originally, the character was just going to basically turn, get up, and then be hit by a lucky charm. So there was not even any running. He only moved like a foot, and then he gets caught. And this turned out to be visually just very confusing. It was basically the beat didn't feel like it had any impact. So he would get up, get hit, and then that was basically it. So I wanted to extend that by having him actually run down the aisle of it for at least a few seconds, so you feel like, oh shoot, he's gonna get away, and then no, he gets caught. So it gives you like at least the semblance of like he has some chance of getting out. But in the end, of course, that doesn't work. And it must be pointed out how great the music turned out for all this. Our great composers, Adam and Dan, came up with the weirdest instruments, especially at this point when he gets caught. They found like the weirdest sort of stringed instruments. I don't even know what they're called, to sort of create the presence of the monster and give this sort of weird, magical, ethereal quality to it. It also invoked just the strangest of vibes, especially for this moment when it's like virtually being like hypnotized / drugs / whatever our character. So it was important that we have just all these crazy instruments being layered into one another, and this smeary effect I added on as well was very fun to do. And then we are into the magic charms world. This is something that went back and forth a few times. So originally, there's going to be two approaches to it. It was either he could fall down and end up in a sort of a gray, black and white version of the store. So like, essentially I call it the Mind Store, where it's a featureless version of the convenience store, and he's being sort of stalked by the Leprechaun between the shelves. And I tried making a version of this, and you'll see that in a little bit. But ultimately, it felt, first off, visually uninspired. It was, again, it's very gray, very sort of monotone, or there's essentially only like one color to it. And lighting it just felt like there wasn't a lot of good lighting opportunities here. So that was then pivoted to this idea, which I believe the original version was going to be a sort of grassy field on top of a mountain with, of course, the Lucky Charms stones. We didn't quite go that far, so it is more like a grassy field in the middle of nowhere, obviously inside the character's mind, and then the classic Lucky Charms things around it. But there's a lot of effort that went into getting this grass to actually look right while feeling soft and pleasant, because this is sort of a tranquil scene, if you will, at least until the Lucky Charms character comes back in. So there's definitely a few iterations in my files of that grass. Once again, using the Camtrack AR app to get this sort of handheld movement. I've been looking around. And then another bringing back the Magic Muncho's theme in whistle form. And then we have the character's eyes coming out. Always very fun. And this is a big one that actually changed in the second version, is all the Leprechaun eyes coming out at once to coincide with this big music change. That was something that did come in the second version. So originally it was going to be still just like one set of eyes here, there, somewhere else. But ultimately there was a note that was given where it's like, oh, we should have like many eyes, like all the eyes basically. So that's, and I actually found it to be a pretty terrifying look when you have that paired with the weird sort of instrumental cue that was given there. So combined with that, it actually turned out pretty good. Yeah, so you get the very sort of smeary eyes as the character looks around, and makes the whole scene feel a bit more like there's building progression to it. So the stakes are getting higher and higher, and he's being closed in on from all sides, and it really helps you put yourself into the character, into like what the sort of extreme distress and paranoia that he's sort of feeling here. And of course we culminate in the final reveal. And the whole film was built around this sort of reveal of the monster looking into the light with the big smile and the dead eyes or whatever. The whole film was essentially bringing us to this moment, and I constructed the story beats around that in order to bring us towards this iconic look, in my opinion. And of course, there was a version where I tried to make the Lucky Charm sort of seep out of the grass as he sort of goes into it, so it sort of reveals itself as opposed to just like cut to it and it's there. But ultimately, it just didn't feel right. It felt a bit too CG in the end to have the Lucky Charm sort of come out of the ground. So ultimately, that was cut, and we just made it simply appear, because it's a dream world, and you can basically do whatever you want. So that's sort of how we ended up there. And the idea of a character being forcibly pushed into either Lucky Charms or into like the ground or something like that, basically drowning him in Lucky Charms, was something that I'd come up with very early on in the project, and it felt like a distinctly terrifying way to die in this. Obviously, the character, it's very ambiguous if he dies or if he's trapped, or whatever in the end, but the whole sequence of being slowly pushed into the ground was, I thought it would just made for a great sort of finale to the piece, and it was definitely a lot of fun to do all the sound effects for this, do the muffled screams and whatever of the character being pushed into the charms. And once again, we have great music for this section. And I was for anyone who does 3D animation, doing a simulation like this, which this was done in Cinema 4D, is not easy. And I was very surprised at how well it turned out on almost nearly the first try, where you get thousands of Lucky Charms essentially being simulated as a character is pushed into it, and none of them sort of jitter around or do any like weird glitchy things that tiny 3D things can often do. I thought this shot turned out great, which was very important because it was our second to final shot. And then you have the ambiguity of what happened to him. Is he, was it all a dream? Is he on drugs? Is he trapped in the mind world? We shall never know. But my interpretation is he certainly is now essentially trapped within his own mind. So him in the real world is essentially just a husk of a person who is now spewing Lucky Charms as well. And the Leprechaun is now free to wander around the real world and wreak havoc now that he has completed this ritual, summoning the Leprechaun, and he has pretty much died in the process. So that is the film in a nutshell. So a bit about the backstory of this film. It was very much conceived from a list of horror ideas that we got back in